I don't know about you folks, but how many of you have been on programs and have been the last presenter in a panel, and there was no, besides Rick Sadler, and you're the last presenter, and everybody has really tried hard, and you were supposed to have 20 minutes, and all you get is 5 minutes. Because the other people, Ruben was here a few minutes ago, but the other folks, they had to share more than the 2 bales of hay. They wanted to share more, but we've really done a great job today, and I'm proud to say that for our last presenter, Rick Sadler, who's assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine. Rick, you have all the time that you thought you were going to have. So let's wrap things up, and Rick, if you could bring us home as the last presenter here today, let's welcome Rick Sadler.
Thanks, Rich. And like Rich, I don't normally drink coffee, but I had a cup earlier, so you might be in for a treat. All right, so good morning, everyone. My intention today is to share the ongoing challenge of food access in Flint by highlighting what I will refer to with lots of jargon variously as food deserts, barrages, oases, and caravans, which I found has only been used once before, so maybe I'll try to popularize that. And I'll largely focus on the development of a caravan to serve food deserts by way of a community-engaged research exercise. And I admit that all of those kind of buzzwords aren't perfect ways of representing food access, but for the sake of a short presentation, I'm just going to use them anyways. So one of the more common metaphors in food access research is this idea of deserts. So similar to a climatic desert, which is largely devoid of vegetation or sustenance. A food desert lacks the facilities to enable healthy. And if you're unable to traverse out of a food desert, you'll be relegated to eating unhealthy and more expensive options. Now, we know from past work in Flint that Flint has many challenges with food access. Food deserts have become a way of life, reflecting a consolidation of stores over many years. And because of Flint's broader economic challenges, some neighborhoods have likely been experiencing these issues from well before the term food desert was even popularized. And so while a cursory look has shown that many neighborhoods lack pedestrian access to grocery stores, community members also confirm that even in neighborhoods with stores, they lack the same quality and variety that suburban stores provide. And attempts have been made to address the grocery gap in the city. So one store opened in 2010, but it closed about 18 months later. And 5 more chain stores have closed either in the city or immediately outside since then. So only 2 of these sites have reopened. So the city is continuing to lose stores. So as Flint has lost stores and more residents have faced the challenge of finding and affording healthy food, a reasonable response has been the growth of charitable food distribution. So excuse the multitude of colors on this map, and if you can, just look for the blue and the orange. So there are some issues with this because the charitable food distribution network can neither address the whole nutrition problem because of the types of foods that are commonly distributed and because of the stigma of giving free food, nor the economic problem of retail leakage. In a way, it's akin to the challenges that communities face when aid comes in the wake of a natural disaster. So the influx of aid can actually have a detrimental impact on the economic vitality within the community because people aren't spending the money they do have at neighborhood stores. And so in this case, the blue on the map, I'm just going to leave the mic for a second. There's kind of a gap. You can see there's not a lot of blue going on here. And there's also some orange. So orange are inactive food bank distribution sites. So, so the other issue with this is that food bank distribution can be ephemeral and fleeting, like a mirage, particularly because they rely on continued charitable giving and on community anchors to serve as sites for distribution. And so, as I mentioned, these defunct sites are shown in orange, and if you look at the orange in comparison to where the blues are, there are gaps in the community. Furthermore, not all of the open sites are able to provide fresh foods. So the big quandary over the few years that I've been working in Flint has been, how do we get healthy food retail specifically to individuals in a community where traditional food retail is difficult to finance and food giveaways aren't able to address the whole problem? One such idea is to develop the equivalent of a food caravan to transcend the limitations of bricks and mortar establishments by creating a mobile market. Much like a traditional caravan which traverses the desert, mobile markets can act more quickly and cheaply than an oasis, than a healthy corner store, for instance, in bringing to a range of different neighborhoods, thereby addressing the food desert issue. And this idea had been thrown around for several years before I arrived back to Flint. So when I returned to my hometown to work with MSU, I wanted to explore this idea using an expert knowledge community-based mapping exercise to identify suitable locations to site such an enterprise. So about a year ago, I started this community-based research exercise to prioritize locations for a mobile market. I want to be clear that when I undertook the mapping exercise, it was purely hypothetical. It was just a means of bringing people together and continuing the conversation around mobile markets or healthy corner stores. So I sought to consult a range of community partners who are listed here, and it's a little funky, but so they're local food entities, they're anti-hunger organizations, community development organizations, and I sought their input with the idea that they would have valuable insights into what matters for citing a mobile market or a healthy corner store. So I'll take you briefly through this research process and what has come about because of it. So the first step involved identifying these community partners, and some of this was just kind of through snowballing. I've been working with MSU Flint since 2011. So when I started this, it's been about 4 years. And a lot of these other partners are, as the roots of MSU Flint suggest, kind of different parts of that organization or are a part of the network more broadly. So these partners and I eventually settled on 5 variables, and I generated corresponding map layers for each of these variables. So density of healthy food options based on a food store assessment done in 2012, and then updated more recently. Socioeconomic distress using variables from census on low income, low educational attainment, unemployment, and lone parenthood, and combining those all together into one index. Also population density, proximity to bus stops, and neighborhood centers from the master plan. So the idea of this was basically to do a retail siting exercise, but instead of looking just at where are the dollars, we were looking at where is the need. So where are the gaps in access to healthy food, and put all of these map layers together. So I'm just going to run you through these to kind of give you a visual impression. So each of these 5 variables were divided up into 5 categories, with higher scores going to areas that are presumably more in need of some kind of intervention. So with the food store assessment, anything that's not shaded in got a score of 10. So those are areas where you have the worst availability of healthy foods based on this heat map of healthy food items available in stores, which are shown as purple dots, sized according to how many healthy food options are available. And so you get 10 if you're in a neighborhood with worst availability, down to 0. And then likewise, for socioeconomic distress, areas in red are exhibit higher levels of disadvantage based on those 5 variables, or the 4 variables here: low income, low educational attainment, unemployment, and parenthood. And higher scores going to the most distressed quintile, and the lowest scores going basically to the most affluent, with the assumption that people in those neighborhoods are less likely to have issues with transportation and access to healthy foods. Same process for population density, and then likewise for proximity to bus stops, with the assumption that people when they're shopping don't like to carry their shopping bags long ways, and if you do have to take a bus, which is already a pain in the butt, that you don't want to have to walk to the bus stop after you've shopped. And so places directly along the corridors got higher scores. And this is like a quarter-mile buffer, just for your reference. The blue lines are. And so places that were farther away got fewer points. And then finally, whether any of these areas were in or surrounding neighborhood centers. So the city recently redid its master plan for the first time in decades, and really kind of pinched in a lot of the commercial zones. So where before we had these big commercial corridors up many of our main streets, there's less demand for commercial land use in general, and so the city sought to kind of reconcentrate some of those land uses. And so the idea here is to, by concentrating or by prioritizing places that are in centers or within a quarter mile of the centers, we can capitalize on some of the other land uses in that area. So the idea of all of this is to find the most suitable places by combining all of these variables together. And there's several ways that spatial data can be combined in a geographic information system or a GIS. And the simplest way would just be to set each variable to the same scale, basically what I did here, and then add them together so you can get 50 points. But that assumes that all of these variables are equally important. And so kind of the next step is to assume, well, I think this one is a little bit more important than population density. Like we definitely need to go where people don't have access to health insurance. And we definitely need to look at socioeconomic distress, but maybe the bus stops and the neighborhood centers don't matter as much. And I could make those assumptions, but that would be a little bit presumptuous because I shouldn't speak for the community at large. And so the second step of that is to go to the community and give them basically a couple of different ways to think about these variables and ask them to prioritize which of these are more important. And so basically what you wind up with are weighted values. And for the sake of this project, the community engagement involved a 3-part participatory mapping exercise. So in the first, I used the analytic hierarchy process or weighted linear combination method, which is essentially like if you have ever been in a sporting tournament of any kind, and it's a round robin tournament. So A plays B, A plays C, B plays C. Everybody plays each other, so to speak. And you say, which is more important to you? Is it socioeconomic distress or population density? And you give a value to whichever one you think is more important based on how much you think it would win by. And then you throw all of that into a matrix and you can derive weighted values based on that. So it's kind of mathy. A slightly simpler method is just a point allocation. So, all right, you've got 100 points, there's 5 variables. If you think they're all equally valuable, give them all 20. If you think one of them is way more important, you can give it as many points as you want, 50, 60 points, whatever. And so what I did is I combined these 2 non-map based methods into one estimation, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then the third method was a direct mapping exercise. So along with that kind of like paper quiz, so to speak, there was a direct mapping exercise where they looked at this map. These are all 5 variables together, so they could see them all at once. And they were asked to just circle on the map based on their knowledge of the community, possibly based on where they knew there were sites that might be amenable to this kind of operation, where they thought would be the best place to do this. And so the end result of that is here. And so I mentioned that I combined the analytic hierarchy process and the point allocation methods. So the yellow to brown shading on the map is a mashup of these 2 quantitative survey components, or the mean of the 2 aggregate scores based on a 10-point scale. And so high suitability sites that receive a score of about 8, so 80% out of 100, are shown in dark brown, and then with lighter colors toward yellow, representing sites that were less and less suitable. And then in addition, I also overlaid where multiple experts had circled specific sites. And so those are shown in blue outlines, and where at least 3 experts had suggested would be suitable for a mobile market, healthy corner store. They're shown with kind of the hashing. So those kinds of areas. And you notice there is alignment of dark brown with the hatching in blue. And so this is valuable because it suggests that there's some validity or some reliability of the methods back and forth between one another, because they were filling out this map after they filled out the non-map portion, and there really isn't any way of knowing of cheating, I guess, so to speak. So these red areas are where these 2 methods converge, and serendipitously, they also often co-located with community facilities. So the 3 sites in the Northwest, there are big anchored churches, either directly right there or nearby. There's corner stores near those locations, and in the Southeast, there isn't any one specific community anchor, but it is in a commercial zone. So they're potentially land for some kind of effort. And so this work has now been published, but again, this whole idea was just kind of a hypothetical exercise. But in the process of collecting it, the partners I was talking with continually were expressing their interest in starting a mobile market. So late last winter, I coordinated the meeting of these many partners, and long story short, they took the ball and ran with it and did all the hard work and created a now fully functional Flint Fresh mobile market, and are using this mapping to partially inform where they're going to go in tandem with where willing participants are located. So if you're interested, it's got cut off a little bit. It's flintfresh.com, the Flint Fresh mobile market, and they now have funding for at least the first 18 months of operation. And they co-locate with convenience stores, senior centers, and churches. They're piloting at one of our elementary schools. And they've procured, as I mentioned, they have funding for 8 months. The idea being that if they can get a little bit of a push, that they can kind of get off the ground. And they're just getting going on some tracking and evaluation, but a need exists for further expertise on this front. And while other food retail projects continue in our community, we have a couple of pastors who are heading up efforts to open a grocery store. Flint Fresh is, at least in the meantime, able to offer a responsive solution to the issue of healthy food retail in Flint's food deserts. So that's what I have. Thanks.
One question. You had out.
Yep. So have you been asked to apply your research in other areas that have a mobile market, such as Grand Rapids? So I haven't, but part of my idea was that this method is broadly replicable. So a couple of geographers, I didn't clarify, but I'm a geographer by training. And there's been a little bit of work with this kind of site prioritization, site optimization. But yeah, my idea was like this method could be replicated anywhere. And for that matter, then you can see with follow-ups with existing mobile markets whether the method's actually valid. Because I don't actually know if it's, if our mobile market goes to those places that nobody visits, then maybe it's not the best way to go about prioritizing the sites. But
Another question. Okay, Rick, thank you very much for closing our presentations today.